All right, boss. How you doing? Welcome to the studio.
Happy to be here.
It's amazing that you made it. I'm very grateful that you spared some time and we could have a nice chat.
Yeah, getting across town in LA is always a challenge, but
It's funny. It's I always feel so grateful and so like thankful for people who have to like cross the 405 or come from too far south or come from Orange County or something like that. Because being in LA, it really is a challenge getting around.
for sure.
So look, today's all about you. I want to get into your books, your academia, your work in China, and everything like that. But I always just like to start off kind of at the beginning. So where are you from originally?
I'm an Atlanta native, probably third generation Atlanta native, which makes that's a very rare combination.
That is wow. I think I'm third generation Canadian. Don't know where that puts me on the scale. But what's so special about Atlanta?
Atlanta's an amazing city. I think, what is it called? The city too busy to hate, and there's some truth to that. Although there was plenty of hate in the air when I was growing up there in the 60s, right? It
Yeah.
was still at the peak of the civil rights era. We were coming through, we'd been gone through segregation by that point, but it was still lots, choked in the air of the lost cause ideology growing up in Atlanta
Oh wow.
at that moment in time.
That would have been wild growing up in the middle of that. Because by the time I was kind of conscious, I mean, where was that? It was the 80s and all of that was kind of past. But I mean, uh, what was it like kind of growing up in the 60s, living through that?
Well, a vivid time.
Yeah.
I went to a segregated church. I went to a segregated school. I lived in a segregated neighborhood. And I think the first time I saw any significant number of people of color was taking the maid back home to where she lived, right in her neighborhood. Because otherwise, the only black people that entered my life were maids and my father's construction company workers.
Yeah.
Whereas Confederate flags were everywhere in our world. I had one on my treehouse growing up. And we lived less than 4 miles from Stone Mountain, Georgia, which Stone Mountain is the largest Confederate monument in the world. There's a it was created by the same guy who designed Mount Rushmore.
Mhm.
It has Robert E. Lee, Jefferson Davis, and Stonewall Jackson as a relief carving on the side of enormous granite outcropping.
Wow.
The same marble that carved it, though, was carved into the Lincoln Memorial.
Oh,
So when Martin Luther King stood on the Lincoln Memorial steps to deliver his famous address there, he was standing on Stone Mountain marble,
oh,
speaking out to, and spoke about the let freedom ring from Chattanooga to the top of Stone Mountain.
wow.
Stone Mountain at that point was the home of the Klan, and they had their national rallies there.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And we went almost every year as a kid. I was less than 4 miles away from it, so it was almost in the shadow of that mountain. We would go there to for school field trips. Now, I go into such detail because one of the things I'm doing right now is helping to redesign the visitor center at the base of Stone Mountain. And we've developed a museum that looks critically and traces the evolution of the myth of the Confederacy as it has been constructed by Southern mythology.
Wow.
And it includes things looking at Birth of a Nation, Song of the South,
Mhm.
Gone with the Wind, and so forth. So it's been a fascinating project to go back to this museum that had been so vividly a part of my childhood
Yeah.
and rethink it for the 21st century,
Yeah.
our current moment. Because that mountain's not going to be torn down. It can't be melted away like the Robert E. Lee statues in Virginia, but it will need to be recontextualized and reframed.
Yeah.
And that's really what this project is about, is rethinking
Yeah.
what what the image of the South is. And part of the problem I have with the debates around monuments that have been going on is the idea that we just do a logic of negation. So in Atlanta, every street that used to be named after a Confederate general is now named after a Black civil rights leader. But negation doesn't create new culture, new identity.
It also doesn't educate about the past.
Exactly. So what we're trying to do is educate about the past and encourage forward thinking reflection about what the South is today and where the South is going. Too late to have a biracial image of the South because the South is what, 20% or more
Hmm.
Latino today. It's got a sizable Asian American population. It still has a residual population of Native Americans. It's got a growing Arab population. So many of those groups would have no connection to the Confederacy and the Civil War at all. So it's too late to reimagine a black white South. We have to imagine a multiracial, multicultural South
Mhm.
that reflects the realities of life for people who are living there. But as long as the logic is one of negation, I think the South continues to sort of stay outside of the Union.
Hmm.
And whenever we have a bout of racism, we always deflect to blaming Confederates for it, rather than recognizing that, say, Ferguson, Virginia, or Ferguson, Missouri, Maryland, even, Illinois, Minneapolis, these shootings that we've seen
Hmm.
that have sparked the Black Lives Matter movement were shootings that are police violence that occurred on Northern soil.
Right.
Racism is an American problem. It's not just a Southern problem. And so we have to think differently
Mhm.
about that. And I think it starts with those of us who grew up in the South who have had to rethink our identity in some pretty profound ways.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing for you to lay all that out. And can you imagine coming from an Arab country or coming from an Asian country and being a first generation American and not really understanding and coming to terms with the civil rights movement or what the Civil War was even fought over, and not even really understanding how all of that is still kind of embedded in your surroundings.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's still the only way one has as a Southerner to think about your identity if
Mhm.
you're a white Southerner.
Yeah.
And so we've got to think of some new models for that if we're going to in fact have racial progress in the US.
Do you think that growing up around that in Atlanta, and in Georgia in general, do you think growing up around that has made you more sympathetic to different points of view?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Totally. I mean, I think anyone growing up when and where I did had to make a conscious choice at some point. They either became a racist or they became an anti-racist, right?
There's no middle ground.
There's no middle ground. Your identity is defined around those axes, and you have to decide.
Mhm.
So I had friends or acquaintances in high school who joined the Klan as they got older, and I had acquaintances who worked for the Southern Poverty Law Center to fight the Klan,
Wow.
right? And so my choice was to leave the South and study and go to grad school in the Midwest,
Mhm.
teach in Boston, and then teach in Los Angeles. So my route since then has been rarely to get back to the South. I get back once or twice a year, but I could never have lived there and pursued the ambitions that I had.
Right. And that was a conscious effort to kind of get away. And was the racial tension part of the reason to get away, or was it just academic pursuit?
It was just academic pursuit. There were not good schools in the South that taught media studies or film studies as it was that I was studying at that time.
Right.
So for me, I had to go elsewhere for my education.
Hmm.
I had done my undergraduate degree at Georgia State University and knew what that experience was going to be like. And it was a mediocre state university and one of the top bottom 5 schools in education in the US. I was better than that and felt like I could do better than that. And so I went first to Iowa, then Wisconsin, Madison,
Hmm.
and then got hired by MIT straight out of grad school to
Okay.
go move to Boston and teach.
And what was it like being in Iowa and Madison and MIT? Like, what was it like being in those locations and then looking back at Atlanta, looking back at your heritage and where you come from?
Well, one of my favorite writers growing up was Flannery O'Connor.
Okay.
And turns out when I went to Iowa, she did her education at the University of Iowa. And my desk was, as a grad student, was in the same office that Flannery O'Connor had occupied when she was the writer's workshop at Iowa. And most of the stories that I love by O'Connor about the South were stories from her reflecting back on a Southern identity from a Midwest perspective. So without even realizing it at the time, I had followed in the footsteps of one of my favorite writers.
Wow.
And Iowa was an interesting place, but ultimately a very constraining place
Mm-hmm.
because the University of Iowa is in Iowa City on the banks of the Iowa River on Iowa Avenue. It was to Iowa. And, 2 miles out of town, out away from campus, you're already in the countryside,
Yeah.
right? So there was just nothing there. So moving to Madison, though, and Madison's an incredible city, and University of Wisconsin's is an amazing university, and probably at that time, maybe now still, the top media studies program in the U.S.
Oh, really? I wasn't aware of that.
I mean, if you want to study production, sure, come out here to UCLA or USC,
Or NYU.
NYU.
Yeah.
But if you're studying history and theory criticism, then Madison, all the Big Ten are the right places because the Big Ten is where media studies and communication studies started
Okay.
in the U.S. So today it may be University of Chicago or Northwestern would coexist with Madison and a few other schools. And my own USC is up there in that cluster at this point, but it's not automatically a given that it's the best film history program in the country.
Okay. And then what was it like being a communications professor and moving out to MIT, which is a highly technical university?
Yeah, I got at MIT just at the moment when the internet is really coming in.
Mm-hmm.
I got my first email account when I arrived at MIT.
What year was that?
It would have been 89 probably,
Yeah.
which puts me well ahead of much of the population, but still it was a shift into the digital. I had assumed I would be going to a school with a good film archive, and I was up for a position at Rochester, and which is where the George Eastman House is, which is one of the top film archives in the U.S.
Yeah, Kodak.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. But that job got frozen by the dean, and instead MIT made me an offer. So that's where I went. And I often think back, that's a moment where going to Rochester, I would be a film historian. Going to MIT, I became a scholar of contemporary culture, especially digital culture, for some 20 years that I was at MIT.
Seems like a bit of a flip of the coin there.
It was. It's like your fate is under the hands of some random dean who decides
Yeah.
who you become. But
Yeah, that's wild.
our institutions shape us.
Yeah.
Where we work defines what we can do and therefore shapes a chunk of our lives. And that was very much the case. So I was what I used to say a walking, talking oxymoron. I was a humanist at MIT. Humanist in one of the world's leading technical institutions. The students were incredible. I loved working with MIT students, but there was ultimately, you can only go so far. I created the first master's program in the humanities at MIT, the comparative media studies program, and ran it for 10 years, but struggled with how to fund it.
Right.
Because most of the ways you might fund a program at MIT weren't available to me as someone in the humanities.
Yeah, wrong donor class.
Yes. Well, what would happen typically is I would be invited to sort of alumni gatherings and be seated at the end of the table with the wives, right? Because MIT did not want me close to their prime donor class.
Right.
But
taking all that money for the humanities instead of tech.
MIT guys used to marry Radcliffe and Wellesley girls. So if you seat me at the end of the table with the wives, we would cut a deal where a certain percentage of the gift given to MIT, the wife could dictate some of it would be given to the arts and humanities. And that was how I got the money. It was a lot of the money we were able to raise was sitting at the wife's end of the table. But yeah, and then they were pushing us on the donors that no one else wanted. And I'm sitting here watching the Epstein stuff unfold, and a bunch of my colleagues at MIT are in the thick of the Epstein files.
Yeah, because he was very friendly with scientists and academics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And including some of the kind of humanities media-directed people at MIT and Harvard. So My fear is that if I had stayed there, I might be in the Epstein file too, because we were so hungrily trying to get money
Yeah.
to support our students and our activities that, and I was none too cautious about who I met with.
Yeah.
If the MIT off fundraising offices told us to go meet with these people, we would have done it.
Yeah.
And so I was just lucky. I don't feel any moral superiority. I don't think I would have gone to the island, but if you told me there was a donor
Mhm.
who was wanting to give $1 million here or there to stuff that was going on at MIT, I don't know that I would have been superior to Chomsky or Pinker or Minsky or any of the other folks at MIT who've been implicated in
Yeah.
the scandal at this point.
Isn't that crazy? Like just going for a dinner to meet a donor can like ruin your whole career now.
Totally,
Yeah.
totally.
You have to be so careful about who you do any business with these days.
Absolutely. And, I think, I think it's somewhat just in the case of some of those people who went well beyond just taking a meeting,
Mm.
and seemingly had knowledge of some of the corrupt activities going on there.
Yeah.
But you got to be careful who you accept money from.
Yes.
And I was probably none too cautious at the time because I was killing myself to support a group of 20 students a year on humanities income,
Yeah.
but we generated a group of maybe, in my time running that program, maybe 100 exceptional students who've gone on to be foundational figures at number of media companies, and many of them very good academics. So I feel validated that what we were trying to do there was a really important
Yeah.
thing. The vision was we needed a new kind of media studies program to reflect a rapidly changing world where media change was affecting every sector of society. And we needed a program that taught people an applied methodology.
Hmm.
If we have applied physics as well as theoretical physics, why not have applied humanistic perspectives where a deeper understanding of culture and society might allow you to make better decisions about how to position yourself in the changing media landscape? And that was the heart of what we were trying to do during the 10 years that I was running that master's program.
And that would have been in the late '80s, so that would have been at the
Well,
foot
that would
at
have
the.
been the early 2000s,
Oh, okay,
actually.
okay.
I left MIT 15 years ago.
Oh, okay. Well, so you're coming right in at the digital revolution.
So yeah, I spent the first 20 years of my time at MIT during the digital revolution.
Okay.
And then when I left MIT, it was with a vision that I would go to Hollywood and explore how Hollywood was engaging with the changes that I'd been watching emerge over that 20-year period of time. And I've arrived here at an interesting period of time as well.
They're still struggling with it.
They're still struggling with it.
Yeah.
Watch the debates the guilds are having over AI,
Mm.
say, at the current moment.
Yeah. I mean, it was the whole backbone of the writer's strike and the actor's strike in
Yes.
2023.
And then the writers and producers strike a decade before that was about what I call transmedia story. That is, how do you take a story that's told in a single medium and spread it across the media landscape?
Mm-hmm.
So, and it was a question of, was that material promotional or core to the storytelling enterprise? If you look at, I don't know, look at where Marvel Cinematic Universe is today, where pieces of story are told across, games and the web and film and television and comics.
Mm-hmm.
That dispersal of story information is what we call transmedia. That is a relationship across media. And Hollywood was trying to come to grips with, is that going to be how stories are told in the future, which was my argument?
Mm-hmm.
Or is the web just a tool for promoting media? And I think it's now very, very clear.
Yeah.
Look at something like the MCU, that it's all an integrated system.
Mm-hmm.
We call it the MCU, Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it's actually just the Marvel Universe. Cinema is a small portion of it.
Yeah, I remember, I mean, for me, like, think of what they did with Harry Potter even before the Marvel Cinematic Universe came out, and how you had, how you had these books that converted into movies, and now they're bringing that same IP back now to do this big HBO series on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, at the time, the big case we were looking at was The Matrix.
Oh wow, that's
Because The
beautiful.
Matrix starts as a single film. Then they go to Japan for the debut of The Matrix, and the Wachowskis and their team are seeing media mix in Japan and the ways that media was systematically being rolled out, and come back on the flight back according to their promotion. In any case, they mapped a strategy where there would be content specifically produced for games. There would be graphic stories, comic stories. There would be the Animatrix. There would be a variety of other things.
Hmm.
And that was the first real success that we could look at and see what was coming.
Right.
We could go back in time probably and look at, say, what the deal Lucas cut around Star Wars, where very forward thinking, Lucas cut a deal where he didn't take salary for the first Star Wars movie. Instead, he accepted a percentage of the ancillary market for spin-off products.
Right.
And he exerted control from the beginning on toys and books and all of that material. So he built his empire not from the films. The films were loss leaders as far as Lucas is concerned, but the films paved the way for this vast, you know, empire of stuff, and still is today. If we look at
Yeah.
The Mandalorian as the next Star Wars movie, but starts on television.
Did you ever hear about that conversation between George Lucas and Mel Brooks about Spaceballs, the parody of Star Wars?
I know Spaceballs. I don't know this story.
So Mel Brooks went up to George Lucas one day and he said, "Look, I'm making this parody on Star Wars. It's called Spaceballs. It's a comedy, blah, blah, blah. Do you mind?" And he goes, "I don't care. Have your fun, but just don't make any action figures."
Yeah, yeah. Action figures is where he made his revenue.
I had them all. I grew up in that era. I was an 80s kid, so I grew up like right at the beginning of Star Wars.
Well, think about a character like Boba Fett,
Hmm.
right? Boba Fett's barely in the first film, right? But the action figure was sold with that first film and became so popular because he had such a cool look that he gradually has become more and more part of that story. So
Absolutely.
that's a good example of something that starts in the toys and then gets deeper and deeper.
Now, your work, was it more focused on like the cultural elements of how this storytelling gets spread out into every facet of communication, or were you more interested in the business elements of it?
Well, I some of both. Well, my training is cultural,
Hmm.
and I'm interested in how stories are told and how they're consumed by fans and other members of the audience, right? And that would be the center of gravity for my interest. But you can't understand that without understanding the business logics that shape that.
Hmm.
And you certainly couldn't understand it from an applied perspective without getting pretty deep into the industry. And if you certainly couldn't raise the money I needed to raise if you didn't have some corporate folks willing to donate
Hmm.
to what you were doing. So it was all bound up together at that point in time. I'd say my reputation is as a cultural studies person who still speaks to industry.
Okay.
So many cultural studies people don't.
Hmm.
We sort of are frightened or hold industry at arm's length. And I've always felt you can't speak truth to power unless you're speaking to power, and you can't change the culture without reshaping some of the industrial logics that are producing that culture.
And you need to understand where the money goes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
got to know where it goes and where it comes from.
Yeah, that's true. So, 20 years at MIT, what was it like coming out to Southern California after that and now being in the weeds of what you've been preaching, speaking about, and educating about?
It was amazing. I mean, I love it here.
Mm.
I
No more winters.
no more winters for sure. This was a Southern boy who'd lived 25 years at that point, more in the Northlands.
Hmm.
Whether it's Iowa or Madison or Cambridge, they were all really cold winters.
Absolutely.
So to suddenly be back in a warm climate, to be in a place where cinema was the number one industry
Hmm.
supported by your university, right? Was suddenly you're at the center of the university, not at the periphery.
Yeah.
and you're training people who are going to go into the industry and have an impact on the creative decisions that are being made. And quickly, while I had built some relations by coastal relations at MIT, suddenly people are seeking me out and coming to my office
Hmm.
to learn what I might have to tell them about how the entertainment world is operating
Yeah.
today.
As you walk past George Lucas's and Steven Spielberg's buildings on the USC
Yes,
campus.
exactly. Exactly. And again, think about who are the kind of leading figures of transmedia. It's Spielberg, Lucas, and Zemeckis are not just filmmakers. They are creators of integrated content across multiple media channels, right? Zemeckis is really driven toward technological innovation across his work. Lucas is the guy who starts, we've already told the Lucas story around Star Wars, and many of Spielberg's films have implications that go far beyond film.
Hmm.
Starting with, say, Schindler's List and the Shoah Foundation would be a good example of how we go from film in Spielberg's case to real world impact.
Yeah. And understanding history and telling those stories.
Yes.
Yeah. It's wild, isn't it? The stories that film can share and educate us with. Like, because I grew up on movies, and it does really play a massive facet in every walk of life.
No, it's we use this term in the research today, civic imagination,
Hmm.
which is before you can build a better world, you have to imagine what a better world would look like.
Hmm.
And cinema in particular has always been in American history one of the central resources by which we imagine what a better world looks and feels like.
Hmm.
So how we imagine ourselves in film becomes very much the reality of who we are.
Yeah.
But that's, and I think we're right now in a place where the old myths of America are just being shattered hourly by. So when we say this is not America that I've known, or this is not who we are, we're throwing Capra and Ford and Spielberg up against, you know, reality television and trying to figure out where America's going to go.
Yeah, the reality television was a very weird stretch because that really popped up during the strike that happened in what, like 2010 or 2008, when the Kardashians became huge because they couldn't hire writers to make TV anymore, so they just went full on reality television.
And there are some I'm a big fan of reality television. I have literally never missed an episode of Survivor, but it is also accountable for some really bad things. And then, Donald Trump and The Apprentice is a story that I think is one that's much more regrettable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what if we look, one of my colleagues calls reality television plebiscite entertainment, which is to say, so many of the reality shows are about voting or about juries.
Mm-hmm.
And those two mechanisms keep alive the hope for some of the more aspirational sides of democracy.
Yeah.
So I've heard skeptics will say more people voted for American Idol than voted for the US presidency. Fair, more votes cast, not more people, because you can vote as many times as you want
Mm-hmm.
for American Idol. And I dare say,
It's kind of the same here too.
if you'd given me a speed dial phone and I could keep voting for Harris as many times as I wanted, that would have been a battle of the trigger fingers.
Yeah.
And so it's not accurate, but it is a case where it's more fun to vote for American Idol than it is to vote for American presidency.
Mm-hmm.
But as we do so, we're learning something about how voting and juries work.
Yeah.
But if we look at it in that light, then The Apprentice is the odd one out because it's not a Democratic-based show. Trump chose himself who to fire.
Mm-hmm.
It was an autocratic show.
Which says a lot.
A warning about what the country would look like if we made this guy president.
Mm-hmm.
What we took from it seems to have been rather that he was a powerful man, a rich man, and had, and there's always this myth that if we just had a businessman in the White House, the country would be run better. We'll see how that's playing out.
Yeah.
But Trump is only partially a product of reality. He's also a product of shock radio.
Yeah.
He was constantly on Howard Stern, which is how all that locker room talk, comes to being. And he was a product of the World Wrestling Entertainment. He has a star in the World Wrestling Entertainment Hall of Fame and there he learned how to construct heat, how chaos and controversy would drive people's interest and attention. And so those lessons, I think, are the ones we may see most often coming out of a Trump White House.
That's wild. I think Howard Stern was really also one of the real kind of pioneers of podcasting, and the way he the way he was able to talk on radio and not have that kind of radio voice and not kind of be working on a script, but just kind of speaking off the cuff and speaking honestly. And I think that even way back when it was a syndicated radio show, that might have been the birth of this kind of looser form of just casual conversation.
Well, it's definitely a step in that process. Yeah. I teach a course on the history of podcasting, which I'm teaching this semester.
Oh, fantastic.
And so, and we go back to people like Edward R. Murrow broadcasting from the rooftop of London. We can talk, but the person that I keep coming back to is Studs Terkel, who was interviewing everyday people and had long interview segments about things that seemed, that were not newsmakers, that was not cutting edge. But yes, the casual conversation of Howard Stern would be part of that story as well. I think we still have to say we're very strongly shaped by the legacy of National Public Radio, really pioneered many of the formats of this. And without something like This American Life, there would be no Serial, and without Serial, this medium might not have taken off as deeply in the culture as it did.
And there were those famous, there was that famous radio show in New York, Opie and Anthony, which is where the comedians kind of started taking over, and they started just kind of chatting with their friends, and that kind of led to this whole comedian push into podcasting, which Joe Rogan's been part of.
Yeah. This week we started out with Father Coughlin and Franklin Delano Roosevelt and ended up with Trump on Rogan and Harris on Call Me Daddy.
Right.
And how this kind of more informal, more conversational style of political rhetoric takes place, certainly with FDR, from my fireside to your fireside kind of intimacy.
Yeah. I love just the brutal honesty of it, because like if you can sit down with someone for 2 hours unedited, there's nowhere to hide. So, and all of your political leanings, all of your ideas for the future, all of your ideas of how to better the country, whatever, are all going to come out. And there's no way you can fake it over a 2-hour period that's unedited.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. Such a beautiful format.
No, I as we said before we went on the air, my podcast, How Do You Like It So Far? We've been running for 6-7 years now. We talk about pop culture in a changing world, and we, it's very casual conversation, but we dig pretty deep right off the get-go. And I do mild editing. I'm now at a place where I edit it myself. And it's so easy to edit sound now, and a little frightening how easy it is to edit, really. But
I go a step further, actually. I edit the show while we're talking, so I'm flipping back and forth with the cameras, and I actually edit it and switch the cameras back and forth, and that's actually the final edit. And then so I don't have to spend too much time. I just clean the audio, and it's out.
Nice. Well, yeah, we're only audio, so I'm just cleaning audio up. But yeah, what do you see as the advantages of the visual element on a podcast? Because I'm such a believer in audio, and what you can do in audio you can't do on television, that I'm a bit recalcitrant about us moving back toward a video format as opposed to an audio only format for podcast.
I think it's just because YouTube has become so popular and it's become such a home for podcasting. And I think whether people are paying full attention and listening to it like with 100% of their attention, or whether it's just on a screen in the background and actually they're only listening to it, but looking every little bit just to see the faces. I don't know which one of that plays out, but it's nice to see the faces of the people talking. It's nice to watch people and their facial expressions work through difficult questions and conversations to see, if they're really under the heat or not, or if their brain's just really working. I like that, and I feel like it's part of the natural progression of podcasting. I feel like when podcasting first came out, it was more of an alternative to radio. And now because news, television, and corporate media has become, in my words, co-opted in many ways, I feel like this is almost like the new television, and more people watch Call Her Daddy
Yeah.
or Rogan than watch CNN and Fox
For
News.
sure.
Yeah.
But I'm less interested in the top end of the spectrum than what it enables on the lower ends, right?
Okay.
And so for me, the video increases the cost and the technical requirements of a form
Mhm.
that right now could be anyone could make a podcast. I mean, one of the first important podcasts was some Harry Potter podcasts, Pottercast
Right.
and Snapecast, which were made by high school students talking about the books.
Right.
So from the beginning, it's a medium that supports not just the top feeders, but people who are middle and appeal to a niche that no one else could speak to. I can see it as an extension of my work as a professor to make a podcast that maybe reaches 2,000 to 4,000
Mhm.
listeners, but that's much bigger audience than I get anywhere else as a university
Right.
professor. So for me, I want to hold on to the bottom level of it, the more participatory end of it, the stuff that may not be as technically polished, that may not be have A-lister guests, may not, have the visual component, but does allow voices to be heard that we would not otherwise hear in our culture.
Yeah.
And that's spirit of experimentation
Yeah.
is really at the heart of what excites me about podcasts.
Yeah,
as a medium.
you've made a really good point. Like, two kids in their basement sharing an iPhone going back and forth can record high enough quality audio to
Yeah,
publish.
the technical standards has gotten low. It's easier and easier to reach high-end sound.
Yeah.
But right now, you need a set or at least a studio really to do video the way our expectations are.
Yeah, it's been interesting trying to raise the quality of what I do here to match, whatever that upper tier is. Whether having a home studio, having the cameras, learning how to edit, and everything like that. It's been an interesting process, but the guests really like the video element. They like being able to share that with friends and colleagues, and a lot of people use it as like a business card, like to share.
I can see that. On the other end, my guests often say, "Are you recording sound?" And they show up with hairs and curlers or greasy hair before they've
Yeah.
showered in the morning. That sense of not having to dress up for a podcast is also very appealing.
It is, and we've just lost Mark Maron and the WTF podcast because I think that everyone was moving to video and creating these television shows, and he didn't want to do that. He wanted to stay audio only because he was a longtime radio guy, and I think he retired from podcasting because of those pressures. He didn't really
Yeah.
get into it. He kind of said, it's been 16 years. I've been doing this for a long time, but I also think there was a lot of pressure to go to video, and he wasn't interested.
Yeah, it's a legitimate debate to be had.
Yeah.
But it is a dividing point where some of us will go one direction and the others will go another, and it may be two different media emerge from that.
Yeah.
But the question for me is, how do we hold on to the more participatory side of it?
Mm-hmm.
Because we're getting voices through podcasts that I would not hear any other way.
Yeah.
And that's exciting to me. During the time when America's undergoing this racial change we've been alluding to several times now, to be able to listen to podcasts by young Black men and women, to listen to Asian American podcasts, and there was incredible Indigenous podcast during COVID
Mm-hmm.
that was telling us what was happening health-wise on reservations across America. So to listen to conversations I could not directly attend and participate to, but to teach me something,
Yeah.
right?
A
It's part of what
democratization.
excites me about this medium. And it comes because it's so easy to get involved
Yeah.
on an audio level.
Yeah. And the internet speeds and uploading and sharing there's platforms for everything
It's
now.
all very simple.
Yeah.
And then it's the intimacy of plugging something into your ears. Traditional radio talked about the end of the driveway moment where you're driving home and you don't want to shut off the show and your car sits at the end of the driveway. That's an NPR phrase. I think there's something more intimate about having them in your ear as you walk around, and especially laying in bed at night, listening to a voice of a stranger somewhere else and feeling less alone and more connected with the world, even as we're drifting off to sleep. So it's always been weird to me when I meet someone I've listened to on a podcast in the middle of the night when I wake up with insomnia and go, "You're real. You're not just in my ear.
Yeah.
You're not just in my head." But that's to me shapes the aesthetic of podcasting
Okay.
to a large degree. And it's being reshaped by the turn toward the video.
Yeah. Like, for example, like I listen to the majority of my podcast when I go out walking, and I go hiking on the weekends, for a couple hours. So I'll put in the headphones and I'll listen to a podcast while I go hiking. I'm out in nature, but you're right, it's audio only. And I'm just, absorbing that information as I hike. It gets me out of my own head and focused on the conversation instead of how much my legs hurt.
Yeah.
And it, it's great to be out there.
Exactly. I have a variety of disabilities from neuropathy at this point. So thinking about how bad my body hurts when I'm walking
Yeah.
versus something that takes my mind out of that space,
Yeah.
it's very helpful
Mm.
for me.
So what would you say your work at USC has really been focused on? Is it really kind of understanding where we are now, or is it more future focused about like where we're headed and maybe some of the traps that we're leading our way into?
Well, I like to joke that they made me give my crystal ball back when I left MIT. I've never been, I mean, it fascinates me that everyone assumes I know what the future is going to be. And if I did, I would make a lot of money in the stock market figuring out which new platform to invest in.
Mm.
I can point in broad sweeping ways that the culture of the 21st century has been about a struggle between copyright holders and a more participatory vision of the culture where everyday people have more power to create and share media with each other than ever before.
Mhm.
That I used to say the future of media is shaped as much by decisions made in teenagers' bedrooms as in corporate boardrooms, and because it's the clash of those two things. And that was the central theme of my book, Convergence Culture, where old and new media collide. And I think we've only seen that expand in more recent years. So every new tech has put some more power in the hands of fans, consumers, the public, and activists.
Mhm.
So over the time that I've been at USC, I started talking of finishing up some of the more corporate focused work, convergence culture, and then spreadable media, creating value and meaning in a network culture. And then we started turning our attention toward politics and activism. And I was funded by the MacArthur Foundation to do some looking at young people's political life,
Mhm.
which ironically that got defunded. We ran out of the money there 2016, the point where we really, politics became absolutely central to our culture.
Right.
But that work led us then to talk about and think about civic imagination.
Mhm.
And so we look at what are the forms of activism, what are the forms of social change that are possible within a given society, given the resources for the imagination they're working with.
And do you see that as having a place in storytelling in the modern era, or?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I started down this path with the Harry Potter Alliance, which at its peak had 500,000 young people around the world engaged with activism through the lens that Harry Potter offered them. And the idea is Dumbledore's army for the real world, right? That a generation of kids learned to read with the Harry Potter books, learned to write with Harry Potter fan fiction,
Mhm.
and became politically engaged through Harry Potter. And unfortunately, Rowling then discovered the power of that when she took her anti-trans positions, and large numbers of those people turned on the author and asserted the values they were getting from those books.
Mhm.
But if we flip forward, last year, the government of South Korea was toppled by women singing K-pop anthems in the street and waving light sticks.
Mhm.
K-pop to overturn the government.
Yeah.
We're seeing in Indonesia today the use of the One Piece flag from the anime and live action One Piece story being used as the symbol of youth resistance to an autocratic government in Indonesia. And that movement is spreading across many of the smaller countries in Asia, much the way, say, the Arab Spring movement was affecting things a decade ago. And if you look at this last election cycle, how many of the key stories of the election cycle hinged on Taylor Swift or pop song singers there were many fan conventions for Kamala, Comic-Cons for Kamala, that were using live streaming and helped raise money and awareness among the core young women voters that had been the sort of centerpiece of that campaign. And Trump was doing much the same with the manosphere.
Yeah.
So we're seeing pop culture is where political change is coming.
Mm-hmm.
Around the world, young people are making change using a vernacular derived from popular fiction. Look at any protest march and it's like cosplay.
Yeah.
There's so many people in costumes, and not just inflatable frog costumes in Portland, but, witch costumes, handmade costumes, all kinds.
Woolly Mammoth and January 6th. Remember those guys at the...
Yes. Well, and his fandom turns out to have been the Northmen and the Vikings.
Right.
They look like Native Americans to our eyes, but if you read that headdress that QAnon shaman we're talking about with the tattooing, the tattoos are all Celtic tattoos and Nordic tattoos. So he's part of a larger movement that's been drawn to these revitalizing Viking mythologies or other mythologies of white warrior races.
And based on your clothing today, are we going to see a K-pop demon hunter protest in Washington, D.C.?
Oh, I think we almost certainly will. I think this has been, for young people that I talk to around the world, K-pop demon hunter has been the consolidation of a trend toward Korean media dominance that we've seen for a long time.
Yeah.
I hate to break it to Hollywood, but their age of dominance over the global marketplace is gone. It is over. If you look at countries like China, Japan, Korea, none of the top money earners in the last few years there have been American films.
Yeah. Squid Games and
there are films here, though, and
Parasite.
Squid Games, one of the highest rated shows in the history of American media. Same with K-pop Demon Hunter, which the team from K-pop Demon Hunter, the girl band, made it to the top slot on the Billboard 100.
Yes.
The first girl group since Beyonce and Destiny's Child to make that ranking.
Wow. Like 30 years ago.
Yeah. Exactly. So it is absolutely where people are at, is stories from elsewhere. I talk about it as pop cosmopolitanism, right? Because traditionally, if we picture what a cosmopolitan person was in in the 60s, 70s, they were someone who went to foreign films at an art house, cinema. They went to the symphony and the opera and drank imported wines and so forth. They were seeking what they saw as the pinnacle of sophistication, which was European high culture. Today, around the world, people are seeking to escape the parochialism of their own culture through embracing pop culture from somewhere else. Much of it from Asia, starting with anime from Japan or Hong Kong action films in the late 80s, early 90s, through Bollywood to now K-pop, K-drama, K-television, K-cinema. And the other countries of Asia, Thailand and Vietnam and China, Taiwan, are all pushing to break into that inner circle of global popular culture. So that sense of where young people are getting their ideas from, they're getting them from Asia, not by and large from the US. Now, within Asia, you're seeing this kind of global scramble where the Chinese are worried about how many Korean and Japanese influences are shaping the lives of their young people. And the same thing is happening in those other countries as well. So those are historically geopolitical enemies, but now they are mutual influencing pop cultures.
Well, I lived in Shanghai for 18 years, and I can tell you towards the end of my stay, I was lucky to get out of China just before COVID. But the Chinese government was absolutely nervous that every single Chinese person was watching Korean dramas instead of anything made in China, and how the entire Shanghai lifestyle and influence was almost 100% Korean dramas, and that freaked them out.
Well, I went to Shanghai. I've spent 2 summers now in Shanghai out of the last 3,
Okay.
and doing field work on fan cultures in Shanghai, which is a story very few journalists have paid any attention to, but which I think it's a very important set of developments. And I was drawn there because just as COVID was breaking, the Chinese government shut down Archive of Our Own, which is the largest fan fiction site in the world, blocked it from access behind the firewall, right? And I was on call as someone who writes about fans by the Chinese media and found myself talking more and more about it while knowing less and less.
Hmm.
So I needed to go there and be on the ground. But what happened in that case was there was a show called The Untamed, which was a boys' love show based on boys' love comics from Japan, translated into this historical epic, a wuxia story told in China for Chinese audiences, where beautiful men become beautiful friends and strong emotional connections to each other.
Hmm.
The rest of the world was doing the logical thing. In the original Japanese, sex was present. In the Chinese, no sex please were Chinese.
Hmm.
So they were putting the sex back in and writing fan fiction that was erotic fan fiction about these men. And that's one group of mostly Chinese women. On the other side, most of the 2 actors at the lead of the show were pop idols.
Hmm.
And their fans were outraged that people were telling stories where they were gay lovers.
Right.
And so they appealed to the Chinese government to shut it down before it did damage
To their
the
careers. Wow.
creative economy of China. And the Chinese government, already skittish about all of this, shut it down.
Mm.
But this is at the same moment that China wants very much to have soft power success like Korea and Japan
Yeah.
has had. So they had a global success in The Untamed, and they started shutting down the fandom around it. Now, it was traumatic for the fans in China.
Mhm.
Had a woman I was talking to, been a big fan fiction writer. She said that she came after school every day when she was in high school. She went to the library and wrote her fan fiction directly onto the website.
Mhm.
But it wasn't just Archive of Our Own that was shut down. It was all fan fiction sites
Oh,
in
wow.
China. So overnight, all of her everything she wrote in high school was removed and gone forever.
Wow.
And she was just weeping, during my office hours that something like this had happened. So I came to see what I could find out about what was going on the ground. And what I discovered was the most vibrant, interesting fan culture I've seen anywhere in the world. Mostly a culture of 20-something women, mostly who are both economic drivers in some ways and creating new forms of fan culture. And I think it's a site where new kinds of political identities are taking shape.
That's
So
what scares the government.
that's what scares the government,
Yeah.
precisely. So take an example of a film like Barbie. The government, when Barbie came out a couple of years ago, the government thought it was a kid's film and wasn't paying much attention.
Mhm.
But these women were renting theaters to have screenings of Barbie and having feminist discussion groups afterwards. And they were reading American feminism and Korean feminism and getting informed. Or we could think about this phenomenon of the random playlist K-pop dance,
Mhm.
which I saw one in a mall in Shanghai. 200, 300 women turned out to dance. They put on a boombox and play like the start of a K-pop song. Anyone who knows the complicated dance moves for that song get into the dance floor and dance.
Mhm.
And so one song might have all of them and another might have 2 of them.
Mhm.
But it's all women dancing together. It's not a couple dance.
Right.
It's
Like female power.
it's a female empowerment dance, but
Mm.
it also creates a camouflage for every same-sex couple to be there because they're dancing together.
Mhm.
They know the same songs, they're out together, but it allows a queer positive space in a country that's deeply homophobic by law,
Yeah.
policy. So that becomes part of the story. Now, the malls are very interested in this group of consumers, and much of this culture is conducted through the malls. But and that's because their brick and mortar malls are dying in Shanghai, despite having a massive number
Yep.
because of online commerce.
Alibaba, Taobao, yeah.
All of those things are eating their lunch. But so if they can get any niche, stable population in, they can make money off of it, and they can adjust what stores they have to reflect that.
Hmm.
So there are multiple malls in Shanghai that are completely dedicated to fan culture.
That's crazy. I had no idea.
And if you go, and what you'll see if you're there at 3 or 4 in the afternoon, is all of these kids, hundreds of them, come home from school, change out of their uniforms, and go to the mall in cosplay.
Hmm.
So purple hair, pink hair, fox ears, all of that. And they're everywhere. The mall is completely populated by fans.
Hmm.
And so the mall opens stores that service them, has events that service their needs.
Mm.
The center of this is Pop Mart, which everyone that I talk to in the business community in China says has been the biggest entrepreneurial success in China in the last decade. And Pop Mart makes little toys,
Right.
vinyl figurines, some of which are original properties that they make. A lot of them are commercial tie-ins with other things, including Western products. So they have their own Harry Potter toys and their own. But often when they tie in with a Western franchise, what we're seeing is one of their stable characters, like Molly, who was a citizen of China, wearing a costume to reflect the most recent ones I've seen were Zootopia 2 toys.
Hmm.
And so she's wearing sloth outfits or fox outfits or bunny outfits, but it's over the body of a Chinese woman. So they remain Chinese at core, their core identity, but
Hmm.
they're embracing culture from elsewhere.
That's interesting, because I was there from 2001 to 2018. And I got to live in China actually before Google was banned, before YouTube
Mm,
was banned, before Facebook was banned, all these before VPNs, and it was funny because once Western culture was really cut off, and I want to say this was around 2005, 2006 ish, in the build up to the Beijing Olympics and things like that. Once that wall went up, that Great Firewall of China, then you started to see whatever was being let in ended up just being huge. And that just showed you how hungry the local people were for something, for some IP to like grab
yeah.
onto and be a part of. And it was so funny because stuff that was popular in the United States wouldn't catch on in China because they wouldn't let it in. But they would let in stuff from Korea. The stuff from Korea would go crazy. So it was really interesting to see like where the next phenomenon was going to come from and whether it was let in and embraced by the government. And then there was this big movement of the government loved these, again, these K-pop dramas and everything like that because it distracted them from real life and it distracted them from
Mm, mm.
politics and it distracted them from wanting to have a democratic country and all these kinds of conversations. But it also had ulterior motives, like you said with Barbie, about teaching them about feminism, about women's rights, and all these other things. So these movies were slightly teaching people in other ways that the government wasn't really paying attention to. So I've loved looking at China because it's such an isolated bubble of an ecosystem about what gets let in and how people consume it, how people connect with it, and then whether they hold on to it or whether they throw it away and wait for the next thing to come in. It's a real like there's not a lot of cultures that exist like that.
But see, it is absolutely a petri dish that you can see cultural change, just like you can see buildings go up in an afternoon.
Yeah.
In Shanghai, you can see culture change almost in an afternoon or at least a week. But China is starting to produce its own pop culture that is taking off.
Mm-hmm.
The Untamed was one sign of that, but Neze 2 was last year the most successful film on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Animated films using Chinese mythology, so forth, swept Asia, swept Latin America. The only place it did not do well was here in the US. We didn't embrace it at all. And they tried it with subtitles and they dubbed it with our actors.
Mm-hmm.
Still nothing took off.
No.
So China, we are the market that eludes China at the moment, but their own domestic market is more and more turning toward Chinese historical fictions in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And the Chinese government is supporting that by much of the rental of Hanfu costumes in China or by government agencies. Now, Hanfu is traditional Han Dynasty costumes
Right.
that people dress up in when they go to museums or water towns, so forth. And that has been a huge phenomenon. It started with young women admiring these costumes that had been banned by Mao, right? The Cultural Revolution got rid of much of the history
Mm-hmm.
of dynastic China. And now it's coming back, and the government is discovering it's got to get behind it
Mm-hmm.
because it anchors a sense of where you go in your imagination back to China, right? So China becomes the center of the imagination of Chinese youth
Yeah.
through the beautiful costumes and historical dramas and animated features.
Well, you can see why the government wants to promote that and get behind it so much because it was a real idealistic time in China, right? Like, I mean, I can count, I lived in China for 18 years. I think there was only 2 movies ever in China that came out during my time there that talked about any story between 1949 and 1979. Like, that was just a no-go zone. Everything was either,
Yeah.
dynastic or modern.
So if you look at something like Three Body Problem, the science fiction
Yeah, yeah.
film, in the
Brilliant.
Netflix version starts with the Cultural Revolution.
Yeah.
Those elements which are in the novel are buried in the Chinese television version of that same book. They don't want to go there, but they're willing. This is a country just a decade ago was banning time travel narratives, right?
Yes.
As going back to the feudal past, but now a sizable chunk of what's created by the culture industry in China is focused in pre-20th century
Mm-hmm.
Chinese culture. And that revival obviously has political stakes, but it's also just the way to offer some kind of imaginary elsewhere that Chinese youth can devote themselves to.
It's very interesting, because I left China around 2018, 2019, and when Xi Jinping took over in about 2016-ish, he really kind of solidified his rule, and he became emperor for life, et cetera, et cetera. And things got much more conservative very quickly. And it's very interesting because I haven't been back since 2019, so everything you're telling me is fresh and new. The way this fan culture and things have kind of popped up and how the government's kind of supporting it in so many ways. And I'm wondering, like, when she eventually leaves, and he has definitely had a more conservative touch as of a leader of anyone since Mao, basically. I'm wondering, like, if they're going to swing back liberal once he's done, and what that'll mean for entertainment and media and culture, and whether China will embrace. There will be some kind of embracing of Western storytelling again, like it kind of was when I was there in the early days, or whether they're going to keep that wall up.
Well, it will be interesting to see. I think there's a whole generation of people who are embracing a kind of feminist, queer, utopian imagination that are going to be hard to put back in a box
Hmm.
as they grow older. There's younger people in Chinese society are being directed toward fan nationalism, like by the government's attempt to control fandom. But the women in their 20s are the ones that I place the greatest hope in. And they are the last of the one-child generation, right?
Right.
So they grew up in a culture that has historically valued sisterhood and brotherhood deeply. It runs through their mythology, and they have no siblings.
Hmm.
So where do they find their siblings? They find it through fandom,
Yeah.
and they find it through constructing these chosen family relations
Hmm.
to pop culture. And those are deep connections they have with each other that will shape their social life for generations to come.
Hmm.
So that's where progressive values are likely to emerge under the current Chinese regime. They're not anti government, right? But they are about imagining other cultural, social possibilities. It is explicitly not political,
Right.
yet it is the kind of small p, the personal's political notions that the feminists have talked about for decades here, that is going to shape who these people are in a profound way. And that's where this concept of civic imagination proves really useful for thinking about it. It's not a political imagination,
Hmm.
right? Politics is about distribution of power and resources. This is about how do citizens relate to each other? What's the social contract between the members of a society? And that's what this new pop culture, whether it's Japanese or Korean or Chinese,
Hmm.
is shifting for this generation of young fan women in China. And it's a fascinating story to observe and
I-
field work on.
Well, I think you nailed it. Like these young women in their 20s and early 30s, they've come through something quite interesting. You know, like they've come through a very isolated existence, and they don't have siblings, perhaps, and maybe they're they're the only ones caring for their for their elders, because of that one child policy. They have all these pressures on them and things like that, and they might have a job that's not very satisfying, and then they don't have that family around them. So they're looking for connection and they're looking for community, and
Fandom provides all of that.
100%. And then it's like, well, how does that fandom shape their political views or their views about who they are, their their rights and things like that? That'll be quite interesting to see how that plays out. But you can absolutely see these, you know, in a lot of ways, Shanghai is a really lonely city, even though there's like 30 million people who live there now, because so many people come from one family, one child families. And then also too, you have this, people are working 12, 14, 16 hours a day, going home to empty flats and things like that. It's like, what do they put their heart into? What do they put their soul into? And people are, and we're going through a generation now where people don't even want to have children.
Yeah. So this is where Pop Mart comes back into this, right? Because Pop Mart are not selling action figures compared to Western action figures, which may have 25 points of articulation and move. They have 2 or 3 points of articulation.
Mm-hmm.
They're contemplation figures. They're things you put that are brightly colored that you put in your cubicle, whether as a student or as a worker. And during the day, you take a few minutes out and here and there to daydream.
Yeah.
And so it gives you a burst of fantasy of a better world in the midst of the rather drab existence that many of these people live through.
Yeah.
And so that helps us to understand why those stories are the way they are. And now that's become a global phenomenon. I'm intrigued by the fact that Pop Mart's broken into the US market and is doing, by all accounts, reasonably well. I'm seeing Pop Mart more and more places. In LA, which was one of the 2 markets they opened first, but you see machines at airports when you travel. People here want those same kinds of qualities in their fantasies. And it's one further example of how Asian pop culture is grabbing the hearts and minds of younger generation people here.
I wonder if it's caught on so fast in Asia also too, because of just this falling birth rate, right? Because you have so many people who are in their 20s and 30s now who aren't raising kids, who have way more time for themselves, and they want to dive into something they care about.
It's it's a small burst of disposable income. So you can get one of the toys for roughly 10 US, and it comes with the whole ritual of the blind box. The blind box, you have a box, you're getting one of 12 characters. You don't know which one it is. So there's a ritual of opening the blind box with your friends, everyone making bets, just making claims of who they think it's going to be, and you open it and it's a surprise. And it's a burst of delight in a social setting that is centered around your friends.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is an interesting dimension of why those kinds of toys took off there.
Yeah. And I wasted my whole youth just playing poker, waiting for the cards to drop.
Same thing, right? It is a kind of gamble.
Yeah, that's it.
Gambling that you're going to get the character that you want from the blind box.
Yeah. And a reason to gather with friends and experience that.
For sure.
Yeah.
It is very much like poker in a way.
So do you see those similar kind of Asian trends occurring here in the United States at all with regards to how people engage with media?
I think
San Diego Comic-Con aside.
I think, go back to the K-pop Demon Hunters phenomenon. American youth are drawn toward Asian culture, period. I've been teaching courses on fandom at MIT and then USC my whole career. When I started, it was Star Trek, science fiction fans. Now the shared culture of the students who take that class is K-pop, right? That is what they all love, what they're all drawn to, regardless of where in the world they are. Now, some of that is we've got more Asian students and international students than before, but a lot of it is I'm seeing Caucasian, Black, and Latino students who grew up from an early age consuming K-pop. They're connected via the networked communication with fans in Korea. One of them in my class became one of the heads of the fan union around a particular K-pop label in Korea, and they flew her over to participate in their activities while she was early in her high school years.
Hmm.
So what we're seeing is their social connections are forged around K-pop, K-drama, collectible toys, Labubus, and Pop Marts, and so forth. That's the world they live in. Now, that's certainly true for Asian American kids. One of my students who was Vietnamese American did a study there and found that many Vietnamese American youth are drawn to this as Asian faces, even if not Vietnamese faces.
Hmm.
But there they face the pressure from the Korean side. Korean fans say, this is not your culture. This is not Vietnamese culture. But the strategic move is to add one or two people to your K-pop group who are not Korean, who are Taiwanese or Thai or Vietnamese. And that gives a point of identification for them and people come in.
Hmm.
Whereas something like Cat's Eye is now a global K-pop group that has Caucasian Westerners in the mix, so that the next generation here will feel the connection, see themselves as part of an Asian phenomenon rather than seeing it as something brought in from the outside. It's no longer even pop cosmopolitan in the way we were talking about it. It is now their culture, their generational marker.
Hmm.
This generation is to K-pop what a previous generation was to Harry Potter,
Right.
right? Just the thing that sweeps a generation and holds it together. And something like Demon Hunters is an instructional manual for how to participate in fan culture.
Hmm.
You know, the motto for the fans is said over and over in the film. And we see everything from Korean snacks to the different groups of fans to Korean talk shows where the performers appear,
Hmm.
the light sticks. It's a basic level introduction for younger kids to discover what K-pop is and how to be a K-pop supporter.
This is interesting. Where do you see this going? Because like, what do you think it does to American society, right? Okay, go back 40 years. Kids growing up 40 years ago, I was one of them. We watched Star Wars, we watched Star Trek, we dreamed of the stars, we dreamed of the heavens, we dreamed of interplanetary discovery, we dreamed about technology. Beam me up, Scotty, whatever, right? The phones that they use, the communication devices looked very similar to iPhones today. Like, in a lot of ways, Star Wars and maybe Star Trek specifically, because it was serialized over episodic television, really kind of informed entrepreneurially where technology is today.
Yeah.
So if we take the kids now that are watching K-pop Demon Hunters and getting crazy about fandom and stuff like that around Korean dramas and K-pop, where are we 40 years from now with the 20-year-olds that are growing up with that
I
today?
think that's an interesting question. I mean, I back when I was at MIT, I did a study of Star Trek at MIT and found that overwhelmingly MIT students chose their major based on their favorite episode of Next Generation,
I believe it.
right? And they call, at MIT, the courses are numbered. So it's course 6, I think, is computer science, if I'm remembering correctly. So they identified the episodes by what the dominant category was. So that's a course 6 episode, where Scotty is fixing the technology, as opposed to course 3 maybe is biology, and Wesley's bio creations take over the ship, right? So that sense of identifying with technology and science as a center for American progress
Hmm.
for that generation was heavily shaped
Hmm.
by Trek.
Absolutely.
This generation, I think if we look at what these Asian media teach us, it's a stronger sense of social cohesion,
Mm.
less individuals, more groups. So that's the big message in Demon Hunters is in part this one woman wanders off and is so obsessed with herself, she's not connecting with the other members of the band. So we're getting a theme of some kind of collectivity. I don't mean socialist collectivity, but just community. And that's there in part, as we've said, to cement the social ties for that generation that feels so socially isolated. A second thing we'd see is environmental consciousness.
Hmm.
And certainly if you look at Studio Ghibli films out of Japan, Miyazaki's films are full of an awareness of the environment and the interconnectedness of humanity, spirituality, and the natural world.
Hmm.
And that, I think, comes with Buddhist or Confucian values, but is something that's recognizable here, and I think may account for how central environmental politics has been for younger people in the US as they connect with a figure like Greta from Scandinavia, but are infused by an environmental awareness
Hmm.
from watching anime.
You could say the same thing about Avatar too with Jim Cameron.
Yes.
Yeah, very similar patterns of storytelling and the importance of nature and connectivity and everything being connected and being one.
And so Avatar is a great example of Hollywood recognizing what does well in a global marketplace and leaning into it.
Hmm.
So every time, Avatar is hugely successful in China. It may be one of the few franchises in the US that still has weight there.
Hmm.
And so, in fact, probably makes more money in China than it does in the US.
Yeah.
Now, into that fray, you then place something like a Netflix or one of the other streamers. Because Netflix is opening markets around the world. And when it comes to a country, the country says, you can come in, but you've got to put a certain amount of investment in local media production.
Yeah.
So they go to Thailand, they make a bunch of movies in Thailand. What are they going to do with them? They put them on the streaming service. And so if you look, and they're carrying them from one country to the other, I call it the global shuffle, where we suddenly have access to pop culture from elsewhere in the degree that we never had it before.
I love to reference this issue, by the way, too, about how the internet has changed so much. You know, when the internet first came onto the scene in the 90s, for me at least, it was all about freedom of communication and no boundaries, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, content creators started to monetize the internet, and now the internet has become kind of completely diffracted and split up, and now it's country by country. So Netflix in Singapore is completely different than Netflix in the United States, and you're going to have the Singapore offerings right there at the top of the page.
Sure.
Next to
But they don't go away when they come here. It's the prioritization of them. So if you look on Netflix sometime under languages,
yeah,
because content is organized by language,
you got to look hard.
you're going to see
Yeah.
Thai content. There may be 100 films from Thailand on Netflix now, or television series from Thailand on Netflix. Now, when I was growing up, you had American television, maybe some low budget Canadian, syndicated content, and a certain amount of British content on PBS.
Right.
We did not have access to. My generation was offered the chance to Ultraman and Speed Racer and Astro Boy, all of which failed miserably in the American market, and Japan went away. Said there's no investment opportunity here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what happened was then American GIs serving in Japan and Korea recorded stuff on VHS for their kids. They brought it back here. The kids shared it with the neighbors' kids. And this generation grew up aware of anime. And fans were doing the fan subbing to make it accessible in English.
Is that how it
And
started?
they were trying to find content they thought and educate people about what this stuff is.
Mm-hmm.
What's good, what's bad, what genres exist in anime that we don't see here. Given anime has not children's media exclusively,
Mm-hmm.
but it has both men and women, adult and child content, sorting the pieces out fell on the fans. And gradually then fans start entrepreneurial shops
Mm-hmm.
in major cities, and then fan conventions, and then streaming services like Crunchyroll, until we reach the point that when you ask Americans what they did during the pandemic, they made sourdough bread, they played Animal Crossing, and they watched Studio Ghibli films on Max.
Oh.
Those are maybe the three big activities people recall as they think back over how they spent that extra time when they were homebound during the pandemic. So that's fan-led innovation, fan experimentation, and the fans have been bringing the content in from these Asian countries and seeking it out.
I had no idea it started with the GIs.
Well, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Something similar has happened with K-pop. Again, servicemen serving in Seoul, bringing back music,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes with Korean wives as well. But, but that sense of that transmission, the government was actually slow to invest in it as a source of soft power. Fans were the ones. and particularly GI-based fans are the ones who brought it to America in the first place.
Yeah, it's interesting to see because when you look at soft power and you look at proliferation of media globally, obviously the United States has been the dominant force, and there hasn't been anyone who's even been able to hold a torch to that except the Koreans. They're the only ones that are even inkling, like even like you could argue that here in the United States we get more Korean content than we get Australian or New Zealand or
That's true.
British,
That's absolutely true.
where we share same language and similar culture and similar values.
Yeah,
Yeah.
almost no New Zealand, some oddball Australian cult comedy stuff. British still has a large footprint here, but I think at this point not as big as Korea
Yeah.
or even Japan with the anime stuff, or India with Bollywood stuff, which had a burst of visibility. It's sort of receding at the moment, but is still there because there's such a large Indian diaspora in the US that it continues to consume. So we are a large market for Bollywood content. We're more and more consuming Latin American telenovelas that come up through the streaming services and
Sure.
build on the fact we have so many Spanish speakers in this country. Why is Bad Bunny performing at the Super Bowl?
In Spanish.
In Spanish, right? It's because more and more Americans are connecting with, Latin cultures, whether because of their birth, where they're from, or because they've been so exposed to that culture that it's second nature to them.
It's funny how do you find it interesting as a professor and as someone who's been studying this intensely for decades, that as the United States becomes more of a diverse place, a diverse country with various backgrounds and ethnicities and languages and cultures, that it's now becoming the consumer hub for all this international content, whereas 30 years ago all of this stuff was completely shunned?
Yes.
Because it's a wild transformation.
Yeah, I mean, it totally changes. So while Make America Great Again, America First is one dominant ideology in our society, but the rest of the society is consuming more media from other places, and especially from the global South, than ever before. And let's not leave Nigeria out of this picture. It's very below the radar, but Nigeria is the third largest producer of media in the world.
Nollywood.
Nollywood, exactly. And that's coming in through Black families seeking content that's Black centered, but it's now being consumed by a much broader array of people. One Nigerian film almost was on the short list for best foreign language film this year at the Oscars. It didn't quite make the 5 that were nominated, but it's the first time a Nigerian film has appeared there. And this year there are like 3 or 4 Arab world films that have made that 15 short list.
Okay.
That also suggest Arab cinema is more and more visible in the US. The first Iraqi film to be considered seriously for an Oscar, The President's Cake,
Okay.
is part of that. The Moroccan film Surat did make it in the top 5, as did the voice of, I never remember the kid's name, but which is a Palestinian film, is in the 5 nominated for Best Foreign Language
Wow.
film. So if we look at that as just a barometer of what's happening, it's no longer Swedish Ingmar Bergman and Italian Antonioni and, French Truffaut. It's, Europe is being pushed to the boundaries, and there's a Danish film this year nominated. There's an Iranian film. Trying to remember what the last country is in that list of the 5 that got nominated, but we're seeing it's a much more diverse set of nations are submitting stuff.
Yeah. And very high quality.
And very high quality. So the Korean film this year, No Other Choice, fell out of the top 5, even though it's an exceptionally good film. So this was a very good year for foreign language films in general. But Netflix is reporting that in the US, something like 40% of the content consumed is in a language other than English.
That's amazing. You know what I've been watching the last couple of weeks is this series on Apple. It's called Tehran, and I love it because they worked internationally with a lot of Middle Eastern, a lot Israeli actors and stuff like this. And what they did was they got them to film in their native languages, and it's pretty heavy on subtitles, or you can pop on the English audio track, but the subtitles are great. And I really love the fact that the Israelis are speaking Israeli, you know, the Iranians are speaking Persian, and like everything's kind of like in their own. And I feel the performances are so much more stronger because they're not all just trying to speak English. And it's been a wonderful series. It's in season 3 now, and it's one of my favorite shows.
Well, going back to when Parasite won the Golden Globe,
Love that.
right? Bong Joon-ho, his acceptance speech there talked about if the whole world of storytelling that's open to Americans if we're willing to sacrifice that little inch at the bottom of our TV screen.
Right.
And since that time, we've seen more and more Americans are willing to sacrifice that inch and watch things with subtitles, especially now we have such big TVs.
Yes.
You're not giving up that much and we can actually read it.
Yeah. Amazing. It's not like we're watching those little wooden boxes that we had 30 years ago. Now we got 85-inch televisions and stuff. The subtitles are plenty big enough to read.
If you can't read a subtitle now, you should have your eyes examined.
Do you think you'll ever go back to Atlanta and reconnect with your youth in that way?
I do come back on a regular basis. And as I said, I've been doing consulting work on the museum at Stone Mountain. But one of the books that I'm currently working on is a book that will be about podcasting and Southern identity.
Well, that's interesting.
Because I think if you look across the genres of podcasting, there have been some really innovative and experimental podcasts. You know, Shittown, for example, which followed Serial as part of the NPR set of shows, is a wonderful story about a gay man living in the South. So we're seeing amazing stories through podcasting there. And podcasting is an important media there because it doesn't depend on sending radio signals over the mountains in Appalachia, right?
Right.
So you often couldn't hear the radio station in the next valley, let alone construct a regional identity in the South in Appalachia. But now podcasting travels very well. You know, there are people all over the South who would listen to a podcast from Atlanta or Nashville. I listen to plenty of podcasts from places like Oxford, Mississippi, here in LA, and that's how I hold on to my Southern cultural roots and identity.
I actually did a podcast on a boat off the coast of Greenland in August with a friend. So we had Starlink and we recorded it and uploaded it right away. So you even have people who are stateless. Yes. You know, who are podcasting from around the world. And I find that just completely fascinating as well.
Really astonishing.
Yeah.
So I just did an article about food podcasts in the South. And there's a movement, Southern Foodways Alliance at the center of, which is reimagining the South through the lens of its food. Because, you know, blacks and white Southerners ate the same stuff, particularly poor white Southerners, because the stuff that is Southern cooking today that we serve on the best tables in the South were weeds in the case of turnip greens and collard greens. You know, many of them came from West Africa in the case of okra, say. And so we can mix our foods and our foodways together and construct a new multicultural, multiracial South that's held together by gumbo, and the slime from okra cooked in gumbo becomes the common element that stitches all of the other ingredients together. So it's one of the places I found that people are asking the question about what happens next. How do you be Southerner in the 21st century? And it may be the foods that we eat more than the flags we wave determine how we understand ourselves.
Do you find it interesting that you grew up during, you know, the civil rights movement and you were surrounded by all this segregation? And you said it beautifully earlier, you know, you either came to terms with racial diversity or you became a racist. There was no kind of middle ground. And I find after listening to you now for the last hour or so that we've been chatting, an hour and a half, like I find that your experience in your youth really does, in my eyes, shapes everything you're doing now. Because I feel like you're incredibly culturally sensitive to other points of views and in media and trying to understand that other. And I find that incredibly fascinating.
Yeah, empathy is maybe one of my real skills as a scholar. It served me well, and it comes out of being bullied and being something of an outcast as a kid and not finding my space very easily, which means I move into a new space and I'm open to new experiences and discovering new things. And I have that experience of being picked on,
Hmm.
which gives me empathy for any group that's an underdog wherever I encounter them around the world. So yeah, they're my Southern roots definitely play.
Hmm.
People often ask, why don't you speak with a Southern accent? And it's in part because speech therapy in elementary school from someone no doubt trained at the Big Ten gave me a Midwestern rasp rather than a Southern drawl.
Mm.
But I like to say I write with a Southern accent.
Okay, that's
Because
interesting.
South is about telling stories and about vernacular language and accessibility. And so I think I write in a style that's somewhere between Baptist church oratory and back porch storytelling
Hmm.
that shapes the scholarly work I do. And people say they hear my voice in everything I write.
Mm. That's interesting. It's amazing. Like it's so nice to see that where you've come from, in all of your travels and now being here in Southern California still is connected to you.
Now it's being Southern is being Georgian in particular is really important to me.
Hmm. And where do you? I mean, how much of your career? I mean, obviously we've talked a lot about the Asian influence and your time in China. Do you see Europe and European influence coming back in any way, shape, or form? Because Europe still has this idealism in Americans' eyes. People still like going to Italy. They like the food. They like the culture. They like the history. There's some good things about the UK. I think France is still the number one destination globally for American tourists. Do you see any of these influences coming in from Europe these days?
Less and less, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's some really interesting cinema coming in out of the Scandinavian world right now, including this new filmmaker from Iceland who did the film Godland and has some other films coming out this year, and including something like Sentimental Value, which comes from Denmark. We're seeing but Scandinavia was never the big influence on American culture outside of Minneapolis,
Mhm.
right? Minnesota.
Right.
But I think it's going to be more of an influence right now. And it has the kind of peaceful tolerance that American society could use more of.
Right.
If I was putting together a formula for what an ideal society might come from, I'd say let's get tolerance from Scandinavia, let's get environmental awareness from Asia, and a sense of community connection from the Asian world as we've talked about it. Let's get a kind of joyfulness out of African countries
Yeah.
or Latin American countries and put that together. And could be the thing that heals a post-Trump America, would be some mix of those qualities. So,
Can't get any more divided.
yeah, I mean, because I think the majority, we're moved into a world where we're a majority minority country, right? The whites are in a minority. They're just the largest minority in America today, but the majority of people are non-white, but just a mix of different races and cultural backgrounds. So I suspect fusions and coalitions of cultural interest will be the order of the day as we come out of that.
Hmm.
And a lot of what Trumpism is that last gasp reaction of a threatened white minority that is used to being dominant and is no longer calling the shots in the directions our culture goes.
Sure.
Now, what happens then? How long will they hold out and fight? Who knows?
Mm.
But I think the coalition is going to be mixed race, multi-cultures, and have a strong voice from Asia, weaker voice from Europe, and probably not from the parts of Europe that we're used to thinking of.
Hmm. Yeah, maybe Eastern Europe or the Balkans and things
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Having seen this film Surat, which I strongly recommend, is by a filmmaker who's Galatian. His films are funded in Spain. He shoots them in Morocco, and this is one of the most compelling action films I've seen in a long time. And its aesthetic comes out of the rave culture. It's a raver film
Oh, it's interesting.
set in a raver adventure film set in the deserts of Morocco.
Brian.
And it isn't taken off here yet, but man, is it good? And I think a lot of people would enjoy it. It hasn't gotten the publicity that it would need to really have the potential impact that film could have.
I mean, if it does well at the Oscars, hopefully someone will pick it up
Yeah,
and
it's
distribute
nominated
it.
for Best Foreign Language Film. It will not win it. It's nominated for Best Sound. It's its best shot because the sound design in it is exquisite, and the mix of techno music and sound effects is unlike anything you've heard.
So storytelling is your business. Storytelling is your life. How much film and TV do you watch a week?
Well, last year I was on medical leave for part of the year. I ended up having watched more than 800 films by the end of the year.
800 films in 1 year.
Yeah. And so I probably watch 4 to 7 hours of media a day.
Wow.
I'm averaging 1.5 films per day right now, all on top of teaching, plus some television every day.
Because you have to keep your finger on the pulse.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
My work is based on pattern recognition, to use an industry phrase, right? Seeing all these scattered, breadcrumbs and putting them together and see what picture emerges.
Mm-hmm.
And we've just been playing some of that game in here, where we go from Scandinavian films to Brazilian to, Moroccan to Chinese and Korean. We've got to look at all of that to put it together and understand where our culture is and where our culture is going.
Has any big studio ever come to you and said, like, hey, what the fuck is going on in this world? Like, where are we headed? Like, how can we make a story that people are going to actually care about?
Well, interestingly enough, Warner Brothers approached me to think about the fourth Matrix film just before the pandemic hit, and then their budget fell apart because obviously no one was going to the theater, so they were last hired, first fired in that case. But it would have been a really interesting ride. And I'm talking to a variety of more smaller scale media makers on a regular basis. But the big studios are, they don't know what's hit them yet, and they probably never will.
Yeah.
They're not seeing the changes that are taking place. They're just seeing hemorrhaging exhibition revenue. They're not making the stuff that appeals to this generation spending more time online watching YouTube videos by content producers and influencers than they are. And so Hollywood at best casts some of them in bit parts in movies, but that's not really to respond to the way this generation consumes media.
It's funny because like I come from a television background, so I've been making like adventure television for 15 years. I started in 2010. I've made like kind of over 75 episodes of crazy shit all over the world, climbing mountains, everything like that. And I have these conversations every week, week in, week out. What do people want? Do you want to commission this? Do you want to commission that? And the two things that I get back from those people and those meetings, and I'm curious, I want to bounce this off of you, is confusion and fear.
Yeah.
So number one, they have no idea what's going on in society. They don't have their finger on the pulse. They don't know what people really want. Like National Geographic just spent a shit ton of money sending Will Smith to Antarctica, right? That's not what the average National Geographic audience member wants to see. They want to see stuff about nature, or they want to see some more original storytelling. And then the other thing is just fear for their own jobs, because all of this consolidation and the rise of the streamers is terrifying them, and there's real job insecurity. So no one wants to take a chance and make the wrong move.
I think that's a fair assessment, right? When I'm called into a corporate boardroom, it's usually in my role as a fan advocate and fan scholar, more so than the content side. But, and the first thing out of their mouth is, we're afraid of losing control. And I have to break it to them that they lost control 20 years ago.
At least.
At least the fans I study can take their content wherever they want, do whatever they want with it. And they're making meaning out of it on their terms, not on the terms of cultural industries. What they want to do is get back in the game, and that requires them to understand what fans are doing well enough to produce content that becomes a resource for the conversation fans want to have. So whoever greenlit Heated Rivalry, for example, hit a jackpot this past year. This has been the biggest fan phenomenon out there in a decade at least.
That's interesting.
And it's basically a Canadian remake of boys' love stories out of Asia.
Right.
It's a genre that has dominated Asian media for a long time, that both gay people and women love stories of two beautiful men loving each other beautifully.
Brokeback Mountain.
Yes. And
Ang Lee.
Exactly. And so that's a great example because Ang Lee got it and Hollywood didn't know what it had. Hence the neglect at the Oscars that year.
Yeah.
And then, but Heated Rivalry hit exactly that sweet spot. And we're going to see more of that kind of programming here off. But it's the same impulse that in the 60s led to Kirk Spock fan fiction,
Right.
right? Women wanting to see a different kind of masculinity and a different kind of emotional openness on the part of men results in a genre that's very much about that.
Yeah. It's amazing how we've come from, Star Trek fan fiction to K-pop demon hunters and everything in between in 40 plus years.
Yeah. I mean, this is the cultural evolution we've seen unfold around us.
No.
But keep in mind that Star Trek had, a Japanese character on the bridge, an African character on the bridge, a Russian character on the bridge, that in its own way, Star Trek's vision for the future was a global vision.
Lots of representation.
Interplanetary vision with Spock,
Yeah.
right? And that continues and persists to the present day. It's got to be one of the most diverse cast shows in television if you look at Trek. That's what upset some of the Trump administration folks who wrote nasty letters about Trek becoming woke, overlooking the fact that Trek woke up in the 60s and hasn't ever gone to sleep.
I would just add that maybe the writing was a little better back then than it is now, but the representation has stayed the same.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think there's some good Trek being produced today, but
Yeah.
I like Brave New World, and I've only seen 2 episodes so far of Starfleet Academy. But so far I'm interested in where it's going.
Okay. That's good. So as we wind down a little bit, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to?
Worlds and worlds, but
I'll have to come to class.
I do, after all, teach 6 hours a week, so
Yeah.
and have to continually generate new content and new responsiveness to students' questions. So I could talk a long time, as I think I've demonstrated, but it's been fun.
Yeah. No, I really thank you for coming and sharing your perspective. Obviously, I reached out to you a little while ago. I didn't know if you'd say yes, but I was really much more familiar with your work in the journalism space and media space, less in the fan culture and fan fiction stuff. But this has been a wonderful tangent, and you've really educated me and hopefully my audience as well.
Well, if your listeners want to learn more about the fan space, Robert Kosnetz in the business school and I have been producing a series of books published on demand through Amazon called the Frames of Fandom book series. There will be and you can get them for roughly $10 on Kindle or roughly $20 in paperback form. And each book takes a different lens to look at fandom through, and a lot of the global fandom stuff is woven through that. So
I think that's going to be amazing. And I think your genre of the way you're looking at this and the way you're studying it is so important because movies nowadays, they're not just movies, they're events. And they want that fandom. They want that, they want the audiences holding on to these stories and these characters for decades.
Yes.
And it's almost like they're crafting these stories from scratch to lead us there. And I think that, the work you're doing and the understanding that you bring to the conversation is invaluable.
Well, I hope some value gets put on it. My next step is going to retire in about 4 years from USC, or as I prefer, untether, and then go travel the earth and teach at a variety of places, but also start to make some media of my own and start to connect with the industries more than I can do when I've anchored to the classroom 2 days a week.
Yeah. Give you a bit more freedom to see what's out there.
Yeah, and I want to go out there, as Kirk would say.
Absolutely. Well, look, thank you so much for swinging by. And please, if you ever want to chat again or come by anytime, message me. And this was a real treat, and I'm really thankful for your time.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right, excellent. Stay tuned, guys. Tune in next week. Bye-bye.